Okay, so let's just unpack this right out of the gate. If you open up a news app right now or just, doom scroll through your social media feed for about 30 seconds, you are going to see it.
Oh, the fear. It is absolutely everywhere.
Right, it's exactly that, the fear. The headline that implies the robots are coming, that artificial intelligence is getting exponentially smarter every single day, and it is absolutely coming for your job.
Yeah, it's really the background hum of the 2020s, isn't it?
Definitely.
Just that low-grade, persistent anxiety that we are all, standing on the precipice of becoming entirely obsolete.
It is. It's the prevailing narrative of our time right now, and honestly, it's completely understandable.
Oh, 100%. When you see a piece of software easily pass the bar exam in the 90s percentile, or you see an image generator win a state art competition.
Or a chatbot write entire blocks of code faster than a senior engineer can even type.
Exactly. The natural human reaction to all of that is defensiveness. It feels existential. You sit in your desk and you ask yourself, well, what is actually left for me to do?
Yeah, it feels incredibly personal, but here is why we are here today. I have a stack of research sitting on the desk between us, and it is a very heavy stack that suggests we are all, well, we're panicking about the wrong thing.
Or, maybe more accurately, we are asking the wrong question entirely.
Right, because the question everyone is asking, the one dominating every single one of those headlines, is which jobs will disappear?
Yes, we are treating this entire economic shift like a lottery where we are just frantically trying to guess the losing numbers.
Is it the truck driver? Is it the coder? Is it the customer service rep? Who gets the axe first?
But the research we are diving into today argues that focusing on the job title is a massive distraction.
A distraction from what?
From the question we should be asking,
Yeah.
the one that actually determines our economic future, which is who can survive the transition?
Who can survive the transition? That sounds, honestly, a little ominous.
It does sound intense.
But also significantly more practical than just staring up at the sky and waiting for it to fall.
It is practical because it's about agency.
Yeah.
So we are doing a deep dive today based on a fascinating, really comprehensive paper titled Bridging the Gap: AI Exposure and Worker Adaptive Capacity.
And this is by Dr. Jonathan Westover, correct?
That's right. But Westover isn't just, giving us his personal opinion on the future of work. He is synthesizing some heavy-hitter data from the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Okay, so serious institutional data.
Very serious. Specifically, he's pulling from some brand-new 2026 findings by researchers Manning and Aguirre.
So this is fresh. This isn't speculation from 5 years ago about what might happen someday.
Yeah.
This is looking at the actual landscape right now.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to move us past that initial paralyzed panic of the robots taking over and look at the highly nuanced reality of the situation.
Because when you actually dig into the data, there is a hidden crisis here, isn't there?
A massive one. But it's not the crisis you think it is. We're going to find out today that while high-paid professionals, so your lawyers, your software engineers, the people who really thought they were safe, they have the highest exposure to AI.
But they aren't necessarily the most vulnerable.
Exactly.
That distinction right there, exposure versus vulnerability, that is the core of what we're going to unpack today for you. Because I think most people use those two words completely interchangeably.
They do, all the time.
Like, if I'm exposed to a virus, I'm vulnerable to getting sick. If I'm exposed to the elements, I'm vulnerable to the cold. But in labor economics, you're saying that's just not the case.
Precisely. In the labor market, exposure just means the technology touches your work.
Okay.
Vulnerability means the technology can entirely destroy your livelihood. And the key to understanding the difference, the wedge that separates those two concepts, is a framework called adaptive capacity.
Adaptive capacity. Okay, I like the sound of that. It sounds like a superpower you'd unlock in a role-playing game.
In a way, it kind of is. It's the difference between hitting a bump in the road and getting into a career-ending crash.
All right, let's set the stage then. We really need to connect the dots between the raw technology, the cold hard economics, and most importantly, and I think this is the part usually missing from all the tech reporting, the human psychology.
The psychology of what actually happens to a person when their life's work fundamentally changes overnight.
So let's dive into this exposure paradox first. Because I think this is where the biggest surprise lies for most listeners. When we see headlines about AI exposure, what are we actually measuring?
Right. How do these researchers determine who is actually in the crosshairs?
Exactly.
So in the context of this specific research, exposure has a very rigorous technical definition. It refers to the degree to which a large language model, an LLM or a generative AI system, can perform, or at least significantly augment, the tasks that make up your job.
The tasks.
Yes, I said tasks, not jobs.
Okay, so it's not asking, can a robot sit in my ergonomic chair and be the marketing director?
No, not at all.
It's asking, can a robot do the 50 little isolated things I do every single day that collectively make me the marketing director?
Exactly. It is a strictly task-based analysis.
Oh.
And the methodology here is really quite brilliant. The researchers, specifically Ellendo and his team, who are cited heavily in this synthesis, they basically took the ONET database.
Which is what, exactly?
It's the Department of Labor's massive, exhaustive encyclopedia of basically every job description in America. And they broke those jobs down into thousands of individual verbs.
Verbs like what? Give me some examples.
Things like drafting an email, welding a joint, analyzing a spreadsheet, negotiating a price with a vendor, comforting a patient.
Oh, I see. Very granular actions.
Incredibly granular. And then they ran those verbs against the known capabilities of current AI models.
They tested the AI against the Dictionary of Human Work.
Yes. They used a specific rubric. They asked, can an LLM cut the time required to do this specific task by at least 50% without losing any quality?
Wow, 50% is a huge efficiency gain.
Right. And if the answer was yes, that task is officially considered exposed.
Okay, that's a highly rigorous way to look at it. So it's not just a vibe check, it is actual math.
It is math. And this is exactly why this current wave of automation is so fundamentally different from anything we saw in the past.
Because if you look at the old wave of automation industrial robotics, the early computing boom in the 80s and 90s, that was really about muscle and routine.
Absolutely. The robot arm on the Detroit assembly line, it can spot weld a car door faster and more accurately than a human ever could.
Or the Excel spreadsheet that effectively replaced the entire room full of clerks who were adding up ledgers by hand with calculators.
Correct. Those old technologies hit manual labor and highly routine clerical tasks. They were what we call discriminative technologies. They were good at doing one specific narrow thing over and over again without getting tired.
But this new wave, this AI wave, it hits entirely different domains.
It hits cognitive domains. We are talking about language processing, complex pattern recognition, rapid data synthesis, and even what we would classify as creativity.
It's generative.
It is generative.
Which is the thinking stuff, the stuff we arrogantly thought was exclusively, uniquely human.
The thinking stuff, exactly. And the scale of this exposure is massive. The data from Ellendo estimates that roughly 80% of the entire U.S. workforce has at least 10% of their daily tasks exposed to AI right now.
Wait, hold on. 80%. That is basically everyone who works in an office or uses a computer. That's not a niche Silicon Valley problem.
It is the vast majority of the modern economy. And it goes further. About 19% of workers, so roughly 1 in 5 people, have at least 50% of their tasks exposed.
That means half of what they do every single day from 9 to 5 could be done, or at least heavily managed, by an AI right now.
Yes. Today. Not in 10 years.
Okay, so if 1 in 5 people can essentially have half their job done by software, who are those people? Because the stereotype, the stock photo we always see in the articles, is the factory worker looking sad, or maybe the fast food cashier staring at a kiosk.
And that right there is the white-collar surprise. The data shows a completely counterintuitive pattern compared to the last industrial revolution.
Counterintuitive how?
Higher wages and higher education levels actually correlate with higher AI exposure.
Are you serious? Because we have spent the last 30 years telling every single kid in America to go to college, get a degree, stay away from manual labor, and learn to work with your mind.
We did. We absolutely did.
And now you're saying those exact people, the ones who follow the rules, are in the crosshairs.
In this specific technological wave, yes. Just think about the roles explicitly mentioned in the text. Software developers.
Yeah.
Financial analysts. Lawyers. Marketing managers.
These are the established winners of the information economy?
They are.
Okay, let's unpack that because I think people are going to be skeptical. Why a financial analyst? That seems like a high-skill, incredibly complex job. You usually need a master's degree or an MBA for that.
It is a high-skill job. But remember our methodology. Break it down into tasks. What is the core day-to-day activity of a junior financial analyst?
Reading spreadsheets.
Synthesizing quarterly earnings reports, looking for historical patterns in massive, boring tables of numbers, summarizing text from global news feeds to predict minor market movements.
I see.
AI is incredibly superhumanly good at exactly that kind of synthesis.
Okay, fair enough. What about a lawyer then? The law is so nuanced.
Think about a junior associate at a massive corporate law firm. They aren't standing in a courtroom giving dramatic, impassioned speeches to a jury like in the movies.
Right, they're in a cubicle.
A huge part of their job is discovery. They are reviewing thousands and thousands of pages of dense contracts. They're highlighting potential risks, looking for standard boilerplate clauses, checking for legal precedents.
And an AI eats that for breakfast.
It does. It can read a 1,000-page merger document in 3 seconds and flag the anomalies.
Okay. And marketing managers.
What do? Drafting promotional copy, creating 50 different slight variations of a single campaign email to see what performs best, analyzing customer sentiment from 1,000 Yelp reviews.
These are all fundamentally language and pattern tasks.
Yes, and a large language model is, at its core, a language and pattern engine.
This really sounds like the elite are in trouble here. I mean, if I'm a plumber, the AI cannot come under my sink, diagnose a leak, and physically turn a wrench to fix the pipe.
Exactly. The plumber, the electrician, the HVAC tech, the nurse drawing your blood, they have incredibly low exposure because their work requires physical manipulation in an unpredictable, unstructured environment.
Robots are terrible at unstructured environments.
They are awful at it. If a pipe is bent slightly differently than the blueprint, a robot freezes. A human just adjusts their grip. But the accountant analyzing the plumber's quarterly business receipts, very high exposure.
So, if I'm listening to this right now and I'm a corporate lawyer or a front-end coder, should I be freaking out? Because it really sounds like you're saying, my job is just gone.
They are definitely in the crosshairs of exposure, but, and this is the crucial, critical pivot we need to make today, exposure does not equal replacement.
Okay, save us here. Walk me back from the ledge. Why not? If the machine can do half of my job, why does my boss keep paying my salary?
Because there is a massive structural gap between technical exposure, which is simply what the technology is mathematically capable of doing, and adoption.
Meaning what companies actually decide to implement in the real world.
Exactly. And inside that gap between what is possible and what is practical, there is friction. A lot of friction.
What kind of friction are we talking about?
Well, regulations. For one massive hurdle, you cannot just have an AI agent legally sign off on a commercial building permit or authorize a medical diagnosis without a licensed, insured human attached to it.
Right, liability laws simply haven't caught up to the tech. If the AI makes a mistake, who do you sue?
Exactly. Then there are the sheer costs. It costs a tremendous amount of money and compute power to implement these enterprise-grade systems securely. You can't just plug ChatGPT into a bank's mainframe.
There's the issue of data privacy, too.
Huge issue. And then there's the issue of trust, the hallucinations, the weird logical errors. A 99% accuracy rate is totally fine if you're asking for a Spotify playlist recommendation.
But it's catastrophic for a legal brief.
Right. If the AI confidently hallucinates a fake case precedent and you submit it to a judge, you get disbarred. It has happened.
And finally, there's the need for what we call the human in the loop.
The human judgment factor.
Right. An AI might be able to rapidly draft a merger contract, but it cannot negotiate the delicate, nuanced relationship between two rival CEOs who historically hate each other. It can't read the room during a tense meeting.
So for these high-exposure professionals, the AI actually becomes a tool, not a replacement.
So the lawyer isn't fired. The lawyer just gets an incredibly fast, superpowered assistant that reads all the boring stuff so the lawyer can actually focus on arguing the case and managing the client.
Exactly. The job evolves. It becomes far more about executive judgment and interpersonal strategy and far less about raw data processing. But that assumes the lawyer has the capacity to adapt to that entirely new way of working.
Which brings us perfectly to the core concept of this deep dive and really the beating heart of Westover's entire paper, adaptive capacity.
Yes. Let's define this properly.
Because this sounds like the literal difference between sinking and swimming in the new economy. What actually is adaptive capacity?
Think of adaptive capacity as a worker's personal survival kit. It is the constellation of resources that allows a worker to successfully navigate an economic shock.
A constellation. I love that phrasing. It's not just one single thing.
It's not. It's financial, it's skills-based, it's your social network, it's even your geography. If your job fundamentally changes or outright disappears tomorrow, do you possess the resources to pivot?
It's not just asking, do you have money in the bank?
Money is a vital part of it. Economists call that liquid wealth. But it's not the whole picture. To really illustrate this, the research presents essentially a tale of two workers.
Okay, let's hear it.
Both of these hypothetical workers have very high AI exposure. Their jobs look incredibly similar on paper in terms of what the LLM can functionally automate.
Let's meet them. Who is worker A?
Let's say worker A is that software developer we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Maybe they live in a tech hub like Seattle. High exposure, right? AI can absolutely write code now. Tools like GitHub Copilot are already doing 40% of the routine work for some of these folks.
But worker A has high adaptive capacity.
Correct. Let's break down their survival kit. Why are they safe? First, financial savings. A high-tech salary usually means a financial cushion. They can probably survive a few months without a paycheck if they get laid off.
Right, they aren't going to miss rent on day one. Second, transferable skills. Even if they aren't writing as much boilerplate code anymore, they deeply understand system architecture, computational logic, and agile project management.
Those are structural skills. Those apply to 50 other tech jobs, even management roles.
Exactly. Third, and this is a huge factor we often ignore, is geography. They live in a thick labor market.
A thick market, meaning there are lots of buyers for their specific type of labor.
Yes, if Amazon lays them off on a Friday, Microsoft is literally down the street. Or Google. Or 1,000 well-funded startups desperately looking for architecture talent.
So worker A is definitely stressed out. They might have to spend weekends learning new AI tools, but broadly speaking, they're probably going to be okay. They aren't going to fall out of the middle class.
Correct. They will weather the storm. Now, look at worker B.
Okay, who is worker B?
Worker B is, let's say, a paralegal or an administrative assistant at a mid-sized regional firm, also very high exposure. AI is genuinely fantastic at scheduling, summarizing meeting notes, filing documents, and drafting basic correspondence. But worker B has a low adaptive capacity.
This is the danger zone. They might have highly limited liquid savings, meaning they absolutely cannot afford to be out of work for 6 months while they retrain. They are living paycheck to paycheck.
And their skills.
Their skill set might be very deeply tied to their current specific role or company. They might say, I know exactly how to run the proprietary filing system for this specific law firm.
Which doesn't help you at all if you have to go apply for a job at the local hospital.
Exactly. And critically, they might live in a geographic market with very few other options.
Right. If you're the lead admin for the one big manufacturing plant or the one regional hospital in a smaller town in Ohio, and you lose that job, you can't just walk across the street to a competitor. There isn't one.
That is the geographic trap. And the research doesn't just theorize about this, it puts a hard number on this vulnerable group. This isn't just a hypothetical exercise.
Let's talk about the scale then, because we constantly hear pundits say millions of jobs lost, and it just sounds abstract after a while.
The data is stark. Out of the roughly 37.1 million U.S. workers who are highly exposed to AI, about 70% represent our worker A.
Okay, so 70% have the degrees, the savings, the professional networks. They represent the exposed but resilient category.
Yes.
They will pivot.
Okay, well, that's the good news. 70% are safe-ish. We don't need to lose sleep over them.
But that leaves the other 30%. That is 6.1 million workers who are in deep, deep trouble.
6.1 million people. Let's just pause on that number for a second. That is a massive demographic. That's the entire population of a small country. I mean, that's larger than the population of Denmark.
It is staggering.
And who are they? Does the data give us a clear demographic profile of who makes up that 6.1 million?
It does, and it's very specific, and frankly, it reveals a profound structural inequality. This group is predominantly women. About 86% of this highly vulnerable group are women. Wait, let me stop you right there. 86%. That isn't a statistical anomaly or a margin of error. That is a very specific gendered crisis. Why is that number so incredibly skewed?
It comes down directly to the types of roles that combine high cognitive routine with low decision authority. We are talking about clerical roles, administrative support, bookkeepers, payroll clerks, paralegals.
Historically, these are exactly the kinds of roles that offered a stable, respectable, middle-class life for women without necessarily requiring an expensive STEM degree.
Exactly. It was a reliable path to economic stability. You could raise a family on that income.
Yeah.
But the very specific nature of that work, the organizing, the summarizing, the scheduling, the processing of endless forms, that is exactly what the current generation of LLMs excels at.
It's not just that the robot can do it, it's that the software agent can do it instantly, flawlessly, and for pennies on the dollar.
Yes, and there is a significant age factor layered on top of this, too.
Right, the research points that out.
These are often older workers.
Right.
We are looking largely at people in their 50s and 60s.
This paints a really clear and honestly really worrying picture. You have a woman, maybe 55 years old, who has been an administrative assistant or an office manager for 20-something years.
And she's excellent at her job.
She knows where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. She knows exactly how the office functions, but suddenly an AI agent can reliably manage the complex calendar, book the intricate travel arrangements, and answer all the basic vendor emails.
Exactly. And because she is in that specific demographic, she faces a perfect storm of vulnerability. High technical exposure because the AI can easily do the tasks. Limited savings because these support roles simply haven't seen the massive wage growth that software engineers have enjoyed over the last decade.
Narrow skill sets.
Narrow skill sets because the company hasn't invested in training her in data analytics or prompt engineering. And often sparse local labor markets.
It really completely challenges the standard media narrative that AI is just coming for the coders and the copywriters. The coders can pivot. The 55-year-old administrative assistant in a mid-sized town might literally not have anywhere else to pivot to.
That is the absolute crux of the issue. We are worried about the wrong people entirely. And this leads us directly into the human costs of this displacement. Because when economists talk about displacement, they tend to treat it like just moving a piece on a chessboard.
A statistical adjustment.
Right. But for the actual person, it's a life unraveling.
Let's dig into that unraveling. We're moving into the human cost here. You mentioned the geographic trap. The 2026 data we're looking at specifically addresses this. What did they find regarding where these highly vulnerable people actually live?
The researchers found that vulnerable workers are heavily concentrated in smaller metropolitan areas and what we call college towns. Think places in the Mountain West or the industrial Midwest.
A town that essentially revolves around one big state university or one massive regional medical center.
Precisely. Contrast that environment with San Jose or Boston. In Boston, if you lose your administrative job, the labor market is thick. There are opportunities absolutely everywhere. You might tap your network and find a new comparable job in 2 weeks.
But in a smaller metro, the labor market is thin.
Very thin. If the main anchor employer in that town automates their back office functions, say the university hospital brings in an AI system to handle all their scheduling, patient intake, and medical billing, hundreds of administrative people lose their jobs simultaneously.
And in a thin market, there is zero capacity to absorb that many job seekers at once.
None. And the ripple effect on the local economy is devastating. The displaced workers stop spending money. So the local coffee shop loses its morning rush. The local retail stores suffer. The tax base shrinks.
And this ties directly back into the financial trap, too. One of the studies in our deep dive focuses heavily on the concept of liquid wealth. Why do economists focus on liquid wealth specifically, rather than just overall net worth?
Because net worth is incredibly deceptive. It's often tied up entirely in the equity of a house or in a 401k that you cannot legally touch without paying a massive penalty. The research shows that liquid wealth, literally the cash you have on hand, the money sitting in your checking or standard savings account, is the single biggest predictor of whether you can weather a period of unemployment.
Cash is king.
Cash is time. That's the best way to look at it. If you have cash, you can wait, you have breathing room, you can take 6 months to retrain, you can search patiently for the right job that actually matches your skill level.
You have the power to say no to a terrible exploitative job offer.
Exactly. But if you don't have cash,
You are desperate.
you're desperate and you are forced to take the very first job you can physically get. And usually that is a significantly worse job. It's lower pay, it has lower stability, it offers zero benefits, you fall down a rung on the economic ladder, and statistically, you almost never climb back up.
This is literally how the middle class shrinks. It's not a slow, gentle decline over decades. It's a sudden, structural drop for millions of people.
And then you add the age penalty firmly on top of that. We mentioned these vulnerable administrative workers are often in their 50s. Yes, and the historical labor data is incredibly sobering on this front, and it completely holds up in the latest 2026 numbers. Older workers, specifically those in the 55 to 64 bracket, are significantly less likely to ever find reemployment than younger cohorts who face the exact same shock.
That is heartbreaking because that is exactly the time in life when people need to be saving the absolute most for their retirement. They are supposed to be in the home stretch of their careers.
It is devastating financially, but it also brings up the immense psychological toll. We talk constantly about GDP impact and macro productivity numbers, but we really need to talk about identity.
Identity.
Imagine that executive assistant we talked about earlier. She has taken immense, justified pride in her work for 30 years. She identifies as the person who keeps the chaos at bay for her team.
She's the gatekeeper. She's the glue holding the department together.
Exactly. And then, without warning, a piece of enterprise software functionally replaces her value in an afternoon. It's not just a loss of a biweekly income, it's a total loss of personal identity.
The question becomes, who am I if I'm no longer valuable here?
That creates a massive, profound existential crisis. This leads predictably to depression, severe anxiety, and a total loss of social connection. Because for a lot of people, the workplace provides their primary community.
It really emphasizes the reality that a job is so much more than just a paycheck. It's a physical place to go. It's structure. It's people who know your name and rely on you.
So when we ask what happens to the human, we are talking about ending viable careers prematurely and sparking a massive mental health crisis for literally millions of people. If we don't manage this transition intelligently, we are looking straight at a lost generation of older workers.
Okay, that is heavy. And honestly, it's terrifying. 6.1 million people at risk of falling off an economic cliff. So I have to ask the critical question. Is this inevitable? Are we all just collectively watching a slow-motion car crash, or can we actually reach over and steer the car?
We can absolutely steer the car.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental good news in this report. This paper is not a prophecy of doom. It is an incredibly practical call to action.
Okay, good. Let's pivot to the solutions then, the organizational playbook. Because if I'm a business leader or a manager listening to this right now, I don't want to be the villain in the story destroying my local community. What is the first move on the board?
Strategy number 1 is adopting a philosophy of augmentation over replacement.
Which we touched on briefly with the lawyer example. Using the AI to help the human, not fire the human. But how does that actually work in real-world practice inside a normal company?
The primary goal is to intentionally design jobs where the AI handles the routine drudge work, which artificially frees up the human worker to move up the value chain.
Give me a real-world, concrete example of this actually working. Because moving up the value chain sounds a lot like corporate buzzword bingo.
Fair point. Let's look at a massive, undeniable example. Take Microsoft and their internal deployment of the Copilot system. When they first rolled this out to their own teams, there was immense internal fear that it was going to be used to replace their own coders.
Obviously.
But leadership didn't deploy it to reduce headcount. They deliberately deployed it to handle the boilerplate code, the highly repetitive cut-and-paste foundational stuff that software engineers actually really hate doing anyway.
Right, the boring stuff.
The boring, tedious stuff. It also handles the basic documentation and the routine unit testing. By systematically offloading all of that friction to the AI, the human engineers can dedicate their cognitive energy to high-level architecture, complex logical problem-solving, and creative user design.
And what was the business result?
The result: overall productivity skyrockets,
Right.
product quality goes up significantly because people aren't burned out on drudgery, and nobody gets fired.
That sounds like an absolute win-win scenario. But, okay, let's play devil's advocate. That's Microsoft. They have effectively endless money, a highly technical culture, and incredibly high-skill workers. What about something much more traditional? What about an older sector like banking?
Perfect example. Look at JP Chase. They implemented a proprietary system called Corin Contract Intelligence. It uses a very specialized LLM to review commercial loan agreements.
Okay, now typically how was that done before?
Historically, this was done by armies of loan officers and junior lawyers, spending thousands upon thousands of billable hours just reading incredibly boring standard financial documents looking for tiny errors.
That sounds like exactly the kind of setup that would result in a mass layoff. You know, the robot reads it instantly now, so goodbye, we don't need you 50 people anymore.
It absolutely could have been a bloodbath. But instead, JP Morgan chose to retrain the staff who previously did that manual review. They recognized that these people possessed deep institutional knowledge of the banking business. They knew the clients.
So what did they do with them?
They moved them permanently into high-value, complex analytical work.
What does that actually mean for their normal day-to-day schedule?
It means they fundamentally stopped being basic readers and started being strategic risk assessors. The AI scans the document and flags the anomalies. It says, hey, this specific indemnification clause on page 40 looks highly unusual based on market standards.
And then the human takes over.
Exactly. The human investigates why that clause is weird, negotiates with the client, and makes a judgment call on the risk. They essentially looked at their staff and said, we don't need you to be a human spell checker anymore. We need you to actually be a banker.
I really love that framing. We don't need you to be a spell checker. We need you to be a banker. It's upgrading the capacity of the human, not casually discarding them.
Precisely. And the core metric of success for the program wasn't reducing the payroll headcount. The metric was that they could suddenly process 12,000% more commercial contracts in a year because the human reading bottleneck was entirely eliminated.
Incredible. Okay, so intentional augmentation is step one, but that heavily relies on trust. If I genuinely believe the new robot is ultimately there to replace me, I am absolutely not going to teach it how to do my job. I'm going to sabotage it.
Which brings us perfectly to strategy 2 in the playbook, transparency and participatory planning. This really comes down to a well-researched concept in organizational psychology called organizational justice.
Organizational justice. That sounds very academic. Break that down for me.
It basically means treat your people like adults. The research clearly shows that how a company executes a major transition or even a layoff matters just as much as what they actually do. If you completely blindside your workforce with a new automation tool, you utterly destroy internal trust.
And not just for the people who might be leaving, it destroys trust for the ones staying.
The survivor's guilt is real. The people who keep their jobs are just looking nervously over their shoulder every single day, waiting for the next shoe to drop.
And what happens to productivity when everyone is terrified?
It completely tanks. Nobody innovates when they're scared. The established best practice here is early, radical disclosure. Do not hide the AI initiative in some secret executive committee. Tell your people it's coming early on. And even better, actively solicit worker input.
You mean actually ask the administrative assistants how to automate the office?
Yes, exactly. Let the administrative staff test the new AI tools during the pilot phase. Ask them directly, how could this tool remove the worst parts of your day? What is the AI getting fundamentally wrong about our workflow? What part of your job do you secretly hate that this software could easily do?
That makes a lot of psychological sense. Because if I'm actively helping to design and train the robot, I'm significantly less scared of the robot. I feel like I have some actual agency and control over my destiny.
And practically speaking, the workers are far more likely to find highly valuable ways to use the AI that the software engineers back in Silicon Valley never would have thought of, simply because the local worker intimately knows the actual realities of the job.
Okay, let's move to strategy 3. We absolutely have to talk about skills. If that 55-year-old admin assistant can't just do basic scheduling anymore because the AI agent handles it flawlessly, she needs new skills. But telling someone to just learn to code has become kind of a terrible, dismissive meme, right?
It is terrible advice. Learn to code is functionally useless for most people, especially someone mid-career who has never shown an aptitude or interest in computer science. Strategy 3 is all about adopting a future-ready approach to skill development, and the absolute gold standard case study here is AT&T.
What did AT&T do? Because they're a massive, very old-school infrastructure company.
They are, but they saw the writing clearly on the wall a few years back. The entire global telecom industry was rapidly shifting from physical hardware and copper cables to software-defined networks and the cloud.
Right.
They had a massive legacy workforce that was highly trained for the old analog world. Literally guys whose whole career was climbing wooden telephone poles and manually splicing physical wires.
So they couldn't just tell those guys to go configure a cloud server.
Exactly. Now, the traditional corporate move would be to fire all those legacy workers and try to aggressively hire new, younger software talent. But doing that at that scale would have been insanely expensive in severance and recruiting, and it would have completely destroyed their institutional culture.
So what did they actually do?
They chose a totally different path. They actively invested $1 billion, with a B, into a massive internal reskilling program.
$1 billion. That is a wildly serious bet on your own people.
It was revolutionary. They essentially built an internal Google Maps for their employees' careers. A legacy worker could log into a portal, see exactly where their current job was heading, which was usually shrinking, and see exactly where the new company roles were actively growing, like in data security or cloud architecture.
And it showed them the path to get from point A to point B.
Exactly. It explicitly mapped out the exact modules and skills they needed to acquire to bridge their own personal gap.
That is incredibly proactive. It's not just throwing a massive, boring textbook at someone and saying good luck. It's illuminating the specific path forward.
And crucially, the company paid for the training. And here is the key point for our listeners. It wasn't just about teaching everyone hard technical skills. The focus was heavily on cultivating adjacent skills.
Adjacent skills. Define that for me.
If you are an administrative assistant, do not try to become a full-stack Python developer overnight. That is a massive, incredibly frustrating leap that is likely to fail. But you can absolutely learn basic data interpretation.
Okay.
You can easily learn prompt engineering, which is really just learning how to effectively talk to the AI to get the most accurate, useful results out of it. And most importantly, you can double down heavily on your soft skills.
Emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, complex conflict resolution, high-stakes communication, empathetic client management. Those are the specific domains where AI is still fundamentally terrible. Those are the human firewalls.
Because if you are the specific person in the office who inherently knows how to soothe an incredibly angry, vital client on a phone call, the AI cannot possibly replace you.
Exactly. Empathy cannot be automated.
Yeah. Okay, so we have augmentation, we have transparency, and we have targeted skilling. But let's be totally real for a second here. Sometimes, despite all the best efforts, displacement happens. Sometimes the specific job just goes away entirely because the fundamental market changes. What happens then?
That is reality. And that brings us to strategy 4, creating a financial bridge. If people absolutely have to leave the organization, how do we systematically soften that blow so they don't immediately fall into that brutal poverty trap we talked about earlier?
Are we just talking about standard severance pay here?
It's severance plus. It has to be more robust. Let's look at Verizon as an example in the literature. When they inevitably had to shift their corporate focus heavily toward 5G infrastructure and fiber optics, they had to significantly reduce their legacy, older workforce. But they didn't just hand out pink slips on a Friday.
What did they offer?
They offered highly enhanced severance packages, heavily extended healthcare coverage for a long transitional period, and substantial retraining stipends that the worker could use anywhere. They also explicitly focused on voluntary separation first.
So letting people actively choose to leave with a parachute rather than just blindly pushing them out the door.
Exactly. Management says, here is a very generous financial package if you happen to want to retire early or take some time off to go start a small business.
And what about protecting those highly vulnerable groups we discussed? The female administrative workers.
For that, the research points to Kaiser Permanente. They have an incredible labor management partnership where corporate leadership actually sits down and co-designs safety nets directly with the labor unions.
So the workers are at the table.
They are at the table, and they specifically build protective programs aimed at lower wage administrative workers to ensure they always have a clear, viable path forward, whether that path keeps them inside the hospital network or transitions them safely outside the company.
That really seems to be the overarching theme of all these solutions. Intentionality. Absolute none of this positive transition happens by accident. You have to actively plan for the human being just as rigorously as you plan for this software update.
You do, but there's always a catch.
Of course there is. Lay it on me.
Individual companies can really only do so much. The company ultimately has to make a profit to survive. If we really truly want to solve this systemic crisis for those 6.1 million highly vulnerable people, and honestly, the millions more who will inevitably follow in the next wave of AI models, we have to look way beyond the corporate walls.
We need systemic solutions.
We critically need systemic resilience.
This brings us to the final section of our deep dive, the big picture. Because I completely agree. If AT&T trains you, well, that's great. But if AT&T goes bankrupt tomorrow, you desperately need skills and safety nets that work everywhere else.
Exactly. At a societal level, we desperately need to move away from the traditional 1 degree for life model of education.
Yeah, that classic idea that you go to university at 18, you learn absolutely everything you will ever need to know for your career, and then you just comfortably coast on that knowledge until you retire at 65. That concept is completely dead.
It is dead and buried. The half-life of a learned technical skill used to be roughly 30 years. Now, it's realistically about 5 years.
Wow, 5 years.
We need to build what the researchers call continuous learning ecosystems. Practically, this means embracing the massive rise of micro-credentials.
Explain micro-credentials for the listeners. How is that different from a degree?
Instead of a rigid 4-year university degree that costs $100,000 and completely takes you out of the active workforce, you take short, highly focused, stackable certifications.
Like what?
Maybe you take a rigorous 12-week online course on advanced data analysis from Google, or through a platform like Coursera. Then next year, you take a specialized module on AI project management. You continuously stack these small educational bricks to build a robust wall of relevant skills over your entire life.
This sounds way faster
Yeah.
and way more flexible for a working adult.
It is faster, it's significantly cheaper, and it is vastly more responsive to what the actual labor market needs in real time. But for it to work, employers have to aggressively change their HR policies to accept them. We need a massive systemic shift towards skills-based hiring rather than lazy degree-based hiring.
Okay, that covers the skills.
Yeah.
But what about the money side of the safety net? You mentioned portable benefits earlier in the outline.
This is a totally critical policy necessity.
Yeah.
Right now, specifically in the United States, your vital health insurance and your retirement matching are intimately tied to your specific employer. If you lose your boss, you instantly lose your entire safety net.
Which is exactly why so many people stay paralyzed in totally dead-end jobs that they know are about to be automated. They literally can't afford to lose their doctor.
It makes losing a job 10 times scarier than it needs to be. Portable benefits fundamentally change that dynamic. It means your core benefits are legally attached to you, the individual human. They securely follow you from a corporate job to a gig economy stint to freelance consulting work.
I love the metaphor of a backpack.
Yes, it's exactly like a secure backpack you wear everywhere you go, rather than a desk you happen to sit at. If you bravely decide to move from a safe job at IBM to being an independent freelance consultant, your vital health insurance backpack comes right along with you seamlessly.
That would entirely change the risk calculus for the gig economy, and for anyone going through an involuntary transition, it takes the absolute terror out of the jump.
It provides baseline security. And finally, we have to systemically address the geography problem. Those thin markets we talked about. The vulnerable small towns in the Midwest or the Mountain West.
Right, because we fundamentally cannot expect millions of middle-aged people to just casually pack up their families and move to San Francisco or New York City to find work. That's totally not feasible, and honestly, with current housing prices, it's not desirable for most people.
Exactly. So the policy solution is utilizing geographic arbitrage.
Geographic arbitrage, meaning remote work.
Exactly. Remote work as a deliberate economic strategy. If the vibrant, high-paying administrative job is physically located in Boston, but the highly capable, newly reskilled worker is living in rural Ohio, modern technology can completely bridge that geographic gap. We bring the digital job directly to the human, rather than forcing the human to migrate to the job.
But implementing that at scale requires massive infrastructure investments. It requires ubiquitous high-speed broadband in rural areas, and it requires stubborn corporate cultures actually being willing to hire and promote remote workers equally.
It does, and concurrently it requires intense regional economic diversification. Smaller towns and mid-sized metros simply cannot afford to rely entirely on just one single legacy industry or one massive anchor employer anymore. They urgently need to explicitly diversify their local economic base so they aren't so incredibly fragile to a single technological shock.
And interestingly, looking at the data, the research specifically suggests that paying living wages is actually a crucial foundational part of building this systemic resilience.
Yeah.
How exactly does a higher minimum wage realistically help protect someone against an incredibly advanced AI? That feels disconnected.
It seems disconnected, but it's not. The researchers point out that higher baseline wages actively help ordinary workers naturally build up that critical savings buffer, that core liquid wealth component of their adaptive capacity that they absolutely need to survive an unexpected transition.
Oh, I see.
If you mandate paying people enough to actually save a little bit of money every month, they inherently become vastly more resilient to sudden macroeconomic change. If they are constantly living paycheck to paycheck on a starvation wage, they are profoundly economically fragile. A single disruption ruins them.
It all entirely connects back to the beginning. If you pay a worker well, they can slowly build savings. If they have liquid savings, they can realistically afford to pause and retrain. If they successfully retrain, they stay gainfully employed in the new economy.
Exactly. And the local macroeconomy safely keeps moving. The confident consumers keep spending money at the local shops. The town survives.
So let's try to bring this all home. We have covered a truly massive amount of conceptual ground here today. We started this whole deep dive right in the thick of the cultural fear of AI exposure, the terrifying daily headlines screaming about the robot coming for the corporate lawyer and the senior software coder.
But diving into the actual numbers, we vividly found that the lawyer and the coder are, statistically speaking, worker A. They are technically exposed, yes. The AI can absolutely do a lot of their daily tasks.
But they intimately possess the massive toolkit required to quickly adapt. They have the deep savings, the extensive professional networks, the highly thick labor markets, and the broadly transferable cognitive skills. They will most likely be totally fine.
The real crisis, the invisible hidden crisis that isn't making the front page of the tech blogs, is worker B. The 6.1 million people, predominantly women, mostly older workers, heavily concentrated in routine administrative and clerical roles, who are currently walking straight into a Category 5 economic storm completely without an umbrella.
High technical exposure combined with terrifyingly low adaptive capacity. That right there is the true danger zone of the 2020s.
It is.
But the ultimate solution here isn't to dramatically smash the servers. We aren't advocating for some kind of modern Luddite rebellion against the technology itself.
No, absolutely not. The technology is here, and it is incredible. The actual pragmatic solution is to collaboratively build a much better umbrella for those people. We need augmentation-first strategies clearly mandated inside companies. We need functional reskilling that is actually accessible and culturally relevant to an older workforce.
We need robust financial bridges like portable benefits that prevent total ruin during a gap year. And we desperately need a proactive policy environment that deeply supports continuous lifelong learning.
All of it. Because it is demonstrably possible to reap the massive economic productivity gains of AI without intentionally causing concentrated, devastating human hardship. That is the fundamentally hopeful, urgent message buried inside this data.
It is absolutely possible, but getting there clearly requires a profound systemic shift in our corporate mindset. It absolutely requires us to firmly stop looking at human labor merely as an annoying cost to be aggressively cut and start actually looking at it as a foundational asset to be constantly upgraded and invested in.
I couldn't agree more.
And that perfectly brings us to our final thought for the day. Because we always like to leave you, the listener, with something provocative to really chew on after you turn this off.
We do. And today, based on everything we've unpacked, I really want to fundamentally challenge our entire societal metric of success regarding technology. Right now, whenever we look at a new AI breakthrough, we exclusively measure its raw capabilities.
Right. We asked, can the new model write a brilliant Shakespearean sonnet? Can it completely ace the medical boards? Can it flawlessly code an entire functional website from a napkin sketch in 3 seconds? We are totally obsessively fixated on the machine itself.
We are constantly mesmerized by the magic trick.
We truly are. It's intoxicating.
But we urgently need to stop collectively asking, can a machine do this specific task? And we need to aggressively start asking, if a machine safely does this task, what actually happens to the specific human being who used to rely on doing it for their dignity and their survival?
That is the real existential question.
Because true, lasting societal progress isn't just the rapid, thoughtless adoption of a shiny new technology. It is the deliberate preservation of human dignity during the messy transition. If we miraculously get the tech perfectly right, but we economically break millions of our people in the process, we haven't actually advanced civilization at all. We've just violently rearranged the deck chairs on the Titanic.
If we get the tech right but break the people, we haven't actually advanced.
Wow, that is definitely going to stick with me. It puts the moral responsibility squarely back on us, the humans building the systems.
As it absolutely should. It is unequivocally the defining economic and moral challenge of our current generation. Well, on that incredibly powerful note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive. We truly hope this nuanced conversation gave you a fresh, significantly clearer lens to look through the next time you see one of those terrifying headlines. It's really not just about the capability of the robots, it's about the resilience of the people.
Adaptability is the brand new stability.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Take good care of your own adaptive capacity, keep learning, and we will see you on the next deep dive.